Westmoreland Chapel, June 5th, 1994.
Okay, let's turn this morning to the 11th chapter of Daniel. I'm sure that of all the sermons you've ever heard, you've never heard one on the 11th chapter of Daniel like this one this morning, at least. The 11th chapter of Daniel has been, I don't know about you, but it's been a very difficult one for me. I've never understood it. It's so detailed and so mysterious that I just have read through it and just wondered what it all meant. Now, if that's been your case, well, today we're going to go through it verse by verse and see what it means. So perhaps this will be the one and only time you will ever see what the 11th chapter of Daniel is saying. Now, I have used about 5 different books on Daniel and I've spent a lot of time going through trying to find out just what they all say on these chapters, and there's a lot of agreement on it, I've found, even among some of the older commentators. But as Daniel himself indicated, the light on this prophecy is going to get brighter as we get nearer the end time. And when you study these books, for instance, I have one, a commentary 200 years old, and another one 100 years old, and then 3 of them that are more up to date. And you can see the increased light on the book of Daniel the closer we get to the modern times. And certainly we're living in the end of the times that Daniel has been speaking of. Now, Daniel 11 can be divided up into 2 parts. We took the first verse last time. It's really a part of Daniel 10, so I'm not going to spend any time with that. The first part of Daniel 11 goes from from verse 2 to verse 35. Now, you might call that the near future of Israel from Cyrus to Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, that's from Cyrus' time, about the middle of the 500s BC, to Antiochus Epiphanes, who lived in about 175 BC. So there's a couple of 100 years that spans there. And I have a quote here: probably no other portion of Scripture presents more minute prophecy than Daniel 11:2 to 35, and this has prompted the sharpest attacks of the critics. The critics don't like this chapter because if it is true prophecy, it is fantastic prophecy because of the fact that it goes into such minute detail over a period of about 150 or 200 years. And in fact, it was this chapter with its detailed prophecy of about 200 years of history that prompted the heathen philosopher Porphyry, who lived in about 300 A.D., or 200 A.D., I think it was, to attack the book of Daniel as a forgery. This passage is either the most precise and accurate prophecy of the future, fully demonstrating its divine inspiration, or as Porphyry claimed, and also the modern critics claim, its dishonest attempt to present history as if prophesied centuries earlier. Now, what it's saying is that when you match up the history, the known history of this time, you can match up the prophecy with the history very well until you get to the 36th verse, and then it becomes pretty hard to do. But the matchup, even by the unbelievers, is so great, even way back in the 2nd century A.D., that they said, look, this can't be prophecy. It's too accurate, and it's too detailed. It's impossible for anybody to prophesy that detailed and that accurate over a period of years. And so they said it must be just a false prophecy. Somebody wrote it in the 2nd century, proclaiming to have written it in the 6th century B.C. But, of course, we know better. We know that it really is true prophecy. Now, we're going to go through it verse by verse, and I'll read the verse first, and then I'm going to read what the history is concerning that verse. Now, by the way, as we know, history sometimes is vague about certain things, and so some of the prophecies here probably prophesy things that the history people never got down in their history books. So it's the prophecy is more accurate than the history itself. But anyway, we'll see that as the unbelievers have seen, that the matchup of the history with the prophecy is really very remarkable. Now, first of all, let's look at the 2nd verse. And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. Now, we have 4 important kings of Medo-Persia. We're still living, of course, in Daniel's time, in the age of Medo-Persia. In fact, he wrote this in the 3rd year of Cyrus, the great king of Persia. And that was about 530 B.C., something like that, 539 B.C. Now, the prophecy came to Daniel in the 3rd year of Cyrus. Now, he says that there's going to be 4 kings arise after Cyrus, and the 4th one is going to be richer than the rest of them, and they're going to stir up trouble against the Greeks. Now, the first one was Cambyses, and the second one Pseudo-Smerdis. Neither one of them are mentioned in the Bible. The third one was Darius the First. He is mentioned in Ezra 5 and 6. But the 4th one was Xerxes the First, who is the king in Esther's time. Now, so we know quite a bit about him from the Bible, because Esther tells quite a bit about him. Now, he gathered a huge army of over 2 million men during his time and tried to conquer Greece with this army, and he got badly defeated in 480 B.C. And so probably the book of Esther tells about after that time, that because the historians say that he sort of retreated into his harem after he got defeated so badly by the Greeks. But that was Xerxes the First. Then we go on to verse 3 and 4. We might call this the rise and fall of Alexander the Great. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. And when he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not among his posterity, nor according to his dominion with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be uprooted, even for others besides these. Now, we've already had prophecies concerning, in Daniel, concerning Alexander the Great. This is pretty much just a repetition of what he said then, that this mighty king was going to arise and have great dominion, and of course we know that was true of Alexander. And this all happened in the 300s B.C., so we're coming down now about 100 years later than we were with, it's almost 200 years later than we were with Cyrus. In fact, about 200 years, he's prophesying about 200 years later than he actually lived in the time of Cyrus, that is, Daniel did. So we see that his kingdom then was broken up in 4 divisions. However, there was, as it indicates there in the last phrase, the last clause there, that there were other lesser rulers that got a little bit of the kingdom. But you have to remember now, the kingdom was broken up into 4 parts and was taken by Greeks. All of them were Greeks. This is the age of the Greek ascendancy. Now, the ones that we're going to be especially concerned with is the 2 kingdoms, the one they call the king of the north and the other the king of the south. Now, the king of the north was the king of the area of Syria, and the king of the south was the king of the area of Egypt. And because they were north and south, respectively, of Israel, that's why they're called the king of the north. But we don't have anything in the Bible or in the prophecy here of the other 2 great kingdoms of the Greeks. But when we think of these kings, the kings of the north were all, as far as Bible prophecy is concerned, were all called either Seleucus, first or second or third, or Antiochus, first, second, or third. Actually, Antiochus Epiphanes, the great type of Antichrist, was Antiochus the fourth. But we're going to start out here with Antiochus the first, and so with Seleucus first. Now, all of the kings of the south, the kings of Egypt, were called Ptolemy. Ptolemy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Actually, we go through 6 of them in this passage of prophecy. All right, the first ones, after Alexander died, the first 2 that took over were Ptolemy the first and Seleucus the first. And this was in around 320 BC. And so let's look at verse 5. It tells about that. Then the king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of his princes. Now actually the king of the south was Ptolemy the first, and one of his princes was Seleucus the first. And then it says, and he shall gain power over him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. Now Seleucus, even though he was an underling of Ptolemy at first, he actually got away from Ptolemy and became the king of the north, of the Syrian area, and he took a whole bunch of other territory up in Asia Minor, and clear over into Asia. He became the largest of all the 4 empires after Alexander. But all of them were Greeks, remember. Now Ptolemy himself was Greek, you see, and all of those southern kingdoms of Egypt were Greek men. So it was really Greek fighting against Greek all the time. Now, let's move on here now to 11:6. 11:6 says, and at the end of some years they shall join forces, for the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the power of her authority, neither he nor his authority. Neither he nor his authority shall stand, but she shall be given up with those who brought her, and with him who begot her, and with him who strengthened her in those times. Now, what actually happened here was, this we're now down to Ptolemy the second, and Ptolemy the second had a daughter named Berenice, not Bernice, but Berenice, an extra E in there. And Ptolemy the second had become more powerful than the king of the north by this time, and this, by the way, we're down to Antiochus the second now, and Ptolemy the second. Antiochus the second is the king of the north. And so Ptolemy insisted that Antiochus the second marry his daughter Berenice, because he thought this would improve the power of his kingdom. And so, in order to do so, Antiochus had to divorce his own wife, Laodice. Her name was Laodice, and she proved to be quite a character. Now, Ptolemy II then died, and Antiochus took back Laodice as his wife, and had Berenice. He had her too, I guess. And then what happened was Laodice, his first wife, murdered Antiochus and Berenice and their infant son. So this is one of the things you find all through this. They're always murdering one. You know, in some ways you think we're living in much better times than those times were. You know, with all of the drive-by shootings and all of the terrible sin that goes on here, it was a lot worse back in those days. I mean, they were just plotting against each other, against their own families and so forth, murdering people right and left. All right, so we move down now to Ptolemy III and to Seleucus II. Now this takes up verses 7 through 9. But from the branch of her roots one shall arise in his place. That is, her brother, Berenice's brother, arose up, who was called Seleucus II. And he who shall come with an army enter the fortress of the king of the north and deal with them and prevail. And okay, so let's look at that. Ptolemy III, brother of Berenice, avenged her death by overrunning Syria. He even slew Laodice, who had killed his brother. So he got vengeance on her. Then the verse 8 says, and he shall also carry their gods captive to Egypt with their princes and their precious articles of silver and gold, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north. So this fellow, after he went to the north and got vengeance on Laodice, he returned. He took a lot of plunder too, 40,000 talents of silver and 2,400 images, including Egyptian idols previously taken from them. Now, when he came back with all these Egyptian idols, the Egyptians were so gratified that they called him Euergetes, which means benefactor, and he became known as Ptolemy Euergetes after that. And then verse 9, then the king of the north shall come to the kingdom of the south, but shall return to his own land. Now, when Ptolemy came up and did all of that damage up in the north, why, Seleucus II tried to counterattack in 240 B.C., but he was completely defeated and had to return to his own land. Now, we go from verse 10 to verse 19. We're taken up with Antiochus III, who was the father of Antiochus Epiphanes. And he was called the Great, Antiochus the Great. Of course, he's king of the north. And we go through two kings of the south, Ptolemy IV and Ptolemy V, in these verses. Now let's look at verse 10. However, his sons stir up strife and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overwhelm and pass through. Then he shall return to his fortress and stir up strife. Now notice it starts out by saying his sons, and then it ends up by saying, and one shall certainly come. Now that is seen in Seleucus II and Seleucus III. No, Seleucus II had two sons, Seleucus III and Antiochus III, who became the king, Antiochus the Great. Seleucus II, however, Seleucus III, the brother of Antiochus III, died early, and that's why it starts out by saying his sons, and then it says, and one shall certainly come, because it was only Antiochus III who attacked Egypt with a great attack. However, verse 11 says, and the king of the south shall be moved with rage and go out and fight with him, and the king of the north who shall muster a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into the hand of his enemy. So Antiochus the Great went down there and made a great attack on Egypt, but he got defeated. In fact, he was almost captured himself, and his entire army was lost. Now Ptolemy had this Ptolemy the fourth, was called Philopater. And the reason Philopater means father lover. And the reason why he was called father lover was because he murdered his father and mother and brother. And the Egyptians called him Philopater in sarcasm, and they hated him anyway. So he's another one of these nice people that you run into in this intertestamental period. Now you can see, by the way, that God is giving the people between, you see, at 400 BC, all prophecy stopped in Israel. And, but you can imagine but they had this prophecy of Daniel, which spanned this period almost completely, and which you can imagine how amazed they were to see these things being fulfilled right before their eyes. Because if we can figure them out, certainly they could. Now, we go on to verse 12. When he has taken away the multitude, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cast down tens of thousands, but he will not prevail. Now, instead, Ptolemy the fourth, this fellow who killed his parents, instead of following up his victory, he made peace with Antiochus, and he lost the power he had gained by his victory through his luxurious indolence. He was a very, very dissolute sort of a fellow. Then verse 13 says, "But for the king of the north will return and muster a great multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come at the end of some years with a great army and much equipment." In 201 BC, Antiochus the Great, that's Antiochus III, assembled another great army and began a series of attacks upon Egypt. Verse 14, "And in those times many shall rise up against the king of the south, also certain violent men of your people, that is, Jews, shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision, but they shall fall." Now, a number of Philip, the king of Macedon, and rebels in Egypt itself combined with Antiochus as he attacked Egypt. Also large numbers of Jews who unconsciously helped the purpose of God as to the trials awaiting Judea, according to this prophecy. They, though helping to fulfill prophecy, they fail in their aim of making Judea independent. So a bunch of rebels in Egypt and outside of Egypt, including some Jewish people who thought that they would get on the good side of Antiochus III by helping him conquer Egypt. But in fact, as we can see under his son, Antiochus IV, it didn't help Israel at all. They got persecuted anyway. Okay, so verse 15. "So the king of the north shall come and build a siege mound and take a fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not withstand them. Even his choice troops shall have no strength to resist." Now Antiochus defeated Egypt at Paneas, and the Egyptian army fled to Sidon, a fortified city, where they were forced to surrender. Then Egypt's choicest army was sent to rescue the Egyptian army, but they failed. Verse 16, "But he who comes against him shall do according to his own will, and no one shall stand against him. He shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his power." Now, you can see this constant going back and forth between the king of the north and the king of the south, and constantly attacking one another. You can guess whose land they had to go through to do it. Israel. And you can imagine what a terrible thing that was for Israel, to have these armies traipsing back and forth, and you can imagine they just didn't come through nicely, you know. I mean, they probably stole grain and bothered the people and robbed them and everything else on their way back and forth. So it was a terrible time. It says, he shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his power. Verse 17, he shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do, and he shall give him the daughter of women to destroy it. But she shall not stand with him or be with him. This is verse 17. Antiochus gives Ptolemy the fifth his daughter Cleopatra in marriage. Now that's strange. We usually think of Cleopatra being an Egyptian, and there were some Cleopatras later. But this first one was a daughter of Antiochus, the king of the north. And he gave Cleopatra in marriage, promising to the Ptolemy, the fifth, promising part of Syria and all of Judea as a dowry. He hoped to get Egypt itself at last for himself. However, after he gave his daughter to Ptolemy, she favored her husband rather than her father and defeated his whole scheme. So, we move on to verse 18. After this he shall turn his face to the coastlands and shall take many, but a ruler shall bring the reproach against them to an end, and with the reproach removed he shall turn back on him. Now, here's a new situation here. The first, Antiochus the Great, took some of the islands of the Aegean in his war with the Romans. By the way, now we're seeing a new power arise, the power of Rome. About 200 BC, they started throwing their weight around. And the reproach in this verse refers to the contemptuous treatment of a Roman ambassador by Antiochus the Great. He said to this ambassador, Asia does not concern you Romans. I am not subject to your orders. The Romans then defeated him twice, once in 191 BC and again in 189 BC. You see, the Greeks had been holding the world up until that time, and now Rome is arising and going to take it over. Now we go to 1120, and this says, There shall arise in his place one who imposes taxes on the glorious kingdom, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, but not in anger or in battle. Now this is Seleucus IV, and he was the son of Antiochus the Great, and also the brother of Antiochus Epiphanes. And he was forced to pay tribute to the Romans in order to raise, and in order to raise this money, he taxed all his domain, including the Jews, from whom he obtained tax by a collector named Heliodorus, who took treasures from the temple in order to pay this tax. Shortly thereafter, Seleucus was killed, and a lot of people think that Heliodorus did it by poisoning. This set the stage for Antiochus IV, Epiphanes, Seleucus' brother. Now we go to spend our time with Antiochus Epiphanes the rest of the time, from 21 through 35. Antiochus Epiphanes reigned from 175 to 164 BC, and 1121 introduces him. And in his place shall arise a vile person to whom they will not give the honor of royalty, but he shall come in peaceably and seize the kingdom by intrigue. He seized the throne with help of others, while Seleucus' son and heir was away. And then verse 22, With the force of a flood they shall be swept away from before him and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. He invaded Egypt in 170 BC and defeated Egypt, The reference to the prince of the covenant prophesies the murder of Onias, who was a high priest of Israel and was a good man, and Antiochus ordered him murdered. Then 11:23, after the league is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a small number of people. This describes the various leagues with other nations that Antiochus made, especially with Egypt, which involved intrigue and deceit, and out of which he became stronger. Now, Antiochus' growth in power from 24 to 26. He shall enter peaceably even into the richest places of the province, and he shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among them the plunder, spoil, and riches, and he shall devise his plans against the strongholds, but only for a time. Now, he attacked Egypt in a time of peace unexpectedly, using the plunder to buy favor and secure cooperation. He formed a scheme for making himself master of the Egyptian fortresses. He gained them all except Alexandria, but only for a time limited by God. 11:25, he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for they shall devise plans against him. He entered Egypt again later with a larger army, with chariots and elephants and cavalry. This is told about in the book of Maccabees. Egypt was defeated, and then verse 26 says, yes, those who eat of the portion of his delicacies shall destroy him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. This, even those who should have supported Ptolemy conspired against him and contributed to his defeat. Then we go on to verses 27-28, which sort of brings to a head the wickedness of Antiochus Epiphanes. 27 says, both these kings' hearts shall be bent on evil, and they shall speak lies at the same table, but it shall not prosper, for the end will still be at the appointed time. Now, neither of these rulers were honorable in their agreements, that is, neither Antiochus nor Ptolemy. The end of the contest between them is reserved for the appointed time. Then verse 28, while returning to his land with great riches, his heart shall be moved against the holy covenant. So he shall do damage and return to his own land. Antiochus, in returning from Egypt with great riches, began to show his hatred for the people of Israel. He slew 80,000 of them, took 40,000 prisoners, and sold 40,000 more as slaves. This also is told about in this book of Maccabees. Now we get to 29-31, which Antiochus, opposed by Rome, persecutes the Jews. 11:29 says, at the appointed time he shall return and go toward the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter. At the time appointed by God, he attacked Egypt again, but his success wasn't as great as before. 11:30, for ships from Cyprus shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. Still another invasion of Egypt occurred in 168 BC by Antiochus Epiphanes, but this time he was confronted by a Roman consul, Gaius Popilius Laenus, who demanded him that he leave Egypt. Now, Antiochus and was afraid of Rome by that time, and so he left, but he took his wrath out on the Jews as he went back to his own land, showing favor toward the Jews who sided with him. Some of the Jews sided with him in order to save their own skins. Verse 31, and forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary, fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. So he polluted the holy altar by offering a sow on it, and he forbade the continuance of the daily sacrifices. He decreed on pain of death that all should conform to the Greek religion, and the temple was consecrated to the Greek god Jupiter, Olympius. He wished to make his own worship universal. This was the greatest peril which ever heretofore threatened revealed religion, the holy people and the theocracy on earth. For none of the previous world rulers had interfered with the religious worship of the covenant people. And Antiochus erected in the holy place an idol, which is referred here as the abomination of desolation. Now, from 32 to 35, the resulting persecution of Israel. 32. Those who do wickedly against the covenant he shall corrupt with flattery, but the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. Now he encouraged the apostates, and there were a number of them, but the strong reaction by the Maccabees especially. There was an old man named Mattathias who lived not very far from Jerusalem, and when he got so angry that when some of the Antiochus men came out to collect taxes or something, or no, to make them subject themselves to the Greek religion, he killed the man. And his 5 sons went with him. They were called Maccabeus. Mattathias was the father's name. And how Mattathias soon died, but one of his sons, Judas, took over the leadership of a group of guerrillas. And they really, after about 3 years, they were so successful that they delivered Jerusalem from the Greeks. And they again restored the temple worship. So they did great exploits. They say that Maccabean army was something else again. Now, verse 33. And those of the people who understand shall instruct many, yet for many days they shall fall by the sword and flame, by captivity and plundering. Many Jews will encourage others to remain true to God, but they shall be viciously persecuted. Their enemies took advantage of the Sabbath to kill them on a day that they would not fight. Antiochus caused some of them to be roasted alive. Verse 34. Now when they fall, they shall be aided with a little help, but many shall join them by intrigue. Now, at first, of course, the Maccabean revolt was very small, and so they weren't able to give much help. But the Maccabean revolters took it out on the people who forsook Israel, that is, the turncoats in Israel. They made them pay with such terrible torture that a number of them joined the Maccabean revolt, but they did it only to avoid getting killed themselves by the Maccabeans. 11:35, and some of those of understanding shall fall to refine them, purge them, and make them white until the time of the end, because it's still for the appointed time. The purging process took place. The amazingly detailed prophecies containing as they do, by the way, these prophecies that I just read you contain about 135 actual statements of what's going to happen, and they've all been matched up with history. So you can see what an astounding document this is. All now fulfilled, constitute an impressive introduction to the events yet future, beginning in 1136. Now, if you would read this chapter through a number of times, probably you would think that it all applied to the same era. But scholars have studied it very carefully and believe that the rest of the verses in chapter 11 apply not to Antiochus Epiphanes' times, but to the times of the Antichrist in the end. Now, there's several reasons for believing this. One of them is the scope of the prophecy demands eschatological reference. Eschatological means end time reference. Look at chapter 10, verse 14, where the angel told Daniel, says, "Now I come to make you understand what will happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision refers to many days yet to come." Now, of course, when you talk about the latter days, it's usually talking about the end time. And so you would expect to find some end time prophecies in this passage. Now, the second reason for believing that these verses from 36 to the end refer to the end time is prophecy from 11:2 to 35 can easily be related to well-known events in ancient history, but this can't be done with 11:36 to 45. So those first verses that I just read you, they can be matched up with history very easily. But the rest of the verses can't be. You can't match them up that way. And so there's another indication that it refers to the end times. Now another thing, verse 36 mentions a king who shall prosper till the indignation or till the wrath. Notice verse 36. It says, "Then the king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god, shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished." Now, what they say, I can't vouch for this because I don't know enough about prophecy, but what they say is that this term, the indignation or the wrath, refers in many prophets to the time of the tribulation. That is the time in which Israel is going to be terribly, terribly punished, and out of which they will be redeemed and restored. So there's, as I say, you study prophecy, and you begin to see how the prophets use a kind of a special vocabulary. And it becomes very much easier to interpret prophecy once you see that. And this is one of their vocabulary terms, the wrath or the indignation. Now, the fourth reason for believing this refers to the end times is predictions in this passage correspond well with undisputed prophecies of Antichrist. And as you go through all these passages about Antichrist, we've gone through a number of them in Daniel already, and they harmonize well with this passage. So that's another reason why we think it applies to Antichrist. Then the fifth reason is there's a natural literary break occurs before 1136. And this is observed, by the way, by the American Standard Version and the Revised Standard Version. They all make a paragraph break at the end of 35. So they evidently, and they do it just from a literary standpoint. Verse 6, "The willful king is a new element separate from either the kingdom of the north or the south, whose history is under consideration through 1135. Look at 1140 for a minute. "At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him." Now that's evidently the Antichrist. "And the king of the north shall come against him." Now before, you see, we had the king of the north and the king of the south, but we didn't have a third king in there. That both the king of the north and the king of the south were attacking. Now you could interpret this otherwise, but I think that the other things indicate that it's to be interpreted in that way. The him in that verse refers to Antichrist, not the king of the north or the king of the south. Now, Jerome was a great Christian writer who lived in about 300 or 400 A.D. And he lived in just after the day of Porphyry, and he wrote a book answering him. He also wrote a commentary on Daniel. And in his commentary on Daniel, now this is way, way back there, you see, in the 300 or 400 A.D. And he says this about 1136. He says, the Jews believe this passage has reference to Antichrist. So even the Jews way back there referred it to Antichrist. And he says, we too understand this to refer to Antichrist. So even way back in ancient church history, they understood that there was a break here, because they understood that the other verses referred to Antiochus Epiphanes, who they lived much closer to. Now, the last reason for believing is of decisive force is the connection with the Great Tribulation, the resurrection of the dead, and the final rewards, furnished by the words, at that time, chapter 1. The time of these eschatological events is the time of the events in the latter part of Daniel 11. Now notice chapter 12. It says, at that time Michael shall stand up. At what time? At the time of the events just talked about. So that's the latter part of Daniel 11. At that time Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was. Now, that's talking about the Great Tribulation, obviously. And he goes on to talk about the resurrection and the giving of rewards and so forth. So this is obviously the time of the end. And he is identifying the time of the end with the time of the latter verses in Daniel 11. So we're going to proceed, assuming that this is the time of the end from 1136 on. Now let's look at 1136. Then the king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, shall speak blasphemies against the God of God, and shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished. That is, the great tribulation has been accomplished. See, because he is going to take it out on the Jews. At least that's Daniel's focus, because he's concerned about the Jews. And for what has been determined shall be done. So he's going to exalt himself, as we know from other scriptures in Daniel and in Revelation. He's going to exalt himself above every god. And so that's very, very well known about the Antichrist. Now, the verses 37 to 39 were titled by one a commentator as the final world religion. The final world religion, verses 37 to 39. Let's look at verse 37. He shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he shall magnify himself above them all. All right, now there's two things here that need a little attention, and that is, he shall regard neither the God of his fathers. Now, if that's talking about Jewish fathers, that would indicate that the Antichrist would be a Jew. And some people believe that, because they believe, how could the Jews accept anybody as their Messiah unless he was a Jew? So it may be. However, it doesn't necessarily have to be, because even though Daniel has used the word Jehovah many times in this passage, he doesn't use it here, which may be very significant. And he says he uses the word Elohim, which can refer to even refer to false gods, and is translated that way many times. So he says here, he shall regard neither the God of his fathers. So it wouldn't have to be since God is Elohim, it could be any god, even a false god. Now how about the desire of women? Now that almost sounds like the fellow's a homosexual, and some people have concluded that. But I won't go into it now because it's a little tedious. But the Hebrew grammar here indicates desired by women is the meaning, as is true of the same kind of grammar used in 1 Samuel 9:20 and Haggai 2:7. So if you look those up, you'll see that it means in both of those instances desired by instead of desire and desire of, or desire for. See, it could be interpreted desire for women. And it says he has no desire. He does not regard the desire of women. Now, what if it means, which it seems to mean, desired by women? What is the desire by women? Well, the desire by all the Hebrew women was what? That's right, that they should be the mother of the Messiah. And so I think that's what it means here. It's just another, when he says he has no regard for the desire of women, I think he's talking about Messiah. You could put Messiah in there. He has no regard for Messiah either. In other words, you see all the prophecies of Christ, he just waves them away. And he has no regard for Christ, in other words. All right, let's go on to 1138. 1138. But in their place he shall honor a god of fortresses, and a god which his fathers did not know he shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and pleasant things. Now, what will be completely different about the world religion at the end will be two things. It will mean complete destruction of all previous religions. Now, this is foretold in Revelation 17, where it says, remember, all the 10 kings turned against the great harlot and destroyed her? The great harlot was all false religions, or all religions, really, because it included the straying Christianity, too, that is, apostate Christianity. And so he's going to get rid of all religions, you see, and just have one religion, that's him. And he's going to set up his own religion where just he, and we learned from Revelation also, he and Satan are going to be the new religion, the worship of Antichrist and of Satan. And also, what does it mean, the God of fortresses? He's going to worship the God of fortresses. Well, I think that means the God of military power. I mean, he will concentrate on military power. That will be his great God. And he will go with that. And he will exalt human. He will be a great humanist, exalting himself as a substitute for Christ. All right, 1139 says, thus shall he act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign god, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain. So he's going to be cooperating. Those who are cooperating with him are given subsidiary rule in his kingdom. Now, the next set of verses, 40 to 43, take up the final world war. The final world war. Now, this is something that I didn't realize before, but if we're interpreting these verses right, then there's a tremendous world war at the end time that's going to be going on even when Christ comes back. But let's look at it. Verse 40. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, horsemen, and with many ships. and he shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. All right, now, so this indicates a military struggle which will characterize the end of the age. And he will be attacked by both the king of the south and the king of the north. And the king of the south can be identified as an African army, and the king of the north, an army in the north of Israel, possibly including Russia. Now, we know that in Ezekiel 38 and 39, it talks about a great attack on Israel by Russia. Now, this may be that time, or it may be that that happens earlier. One of the main fellows that I read after says he believes that that must happen earlier because they're attacking a time of peace, which he thinks would be during the time when Antichrist is protecting them, and then they're destroyed. And then, but by this time, which would be several years later, they've evidently reassembled another army in the north. But anyway, what it looks like it is happening, and let's look at the other two or three verses, 41, 42, and 43. He shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. But these shall escape from his hand, Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. Now, what this evidently indicates is that there is a lot of, after Antichrist takes over, there soon arises some disillusionment with his reign and rebellion against it. So you have an African army attacking him, and you have perhaps a Russian army, an army coming down from the north attacking him. Now, the last two verses, the final battles. Verse 44, but news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate many. Now, Revelation talks about a great army from the east, 200 million men from the east coming. And this is perhaps what alarms the Antichrist at this point, that they're coming to join forces against him. And so he goes out, and evidently he conquers them all, or he seems to have success against them. 11:45 says, and he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and no one will help him. Evidently, he takes up his palace in Israel, and perhaps in Jerusalem itself. Well, we know he does. That's right. He goes into the temple of God and claims to be God. But of course, his Christ is going to return and destroy him. But he succeeds in establishing his 10th palace in Jerusalem. Actually, the struggle goes on right up to the day of the second advent of Christ, as brought out in Zechariah 14:1-4. Daniel doesn't dwell upon the details of the climax of this struggle. The destruction of the beast is described in Revelation 19. Now, I got to thinking, what indication is there in other prophecies that there's going to be this rebellion against Antichrist and all of this world war at the end? Then I got thinking about Daniel 2. You remember a great point is made in Daniel 2 about the final kingdom being a mixture of iron and clay. In other words, there's going to be a mixture showing that they can't stick together. And so that perhaps would indicate that this is a correct interpretation also. Well, we've gotten through Daniel 11 verse by verse. I didn't think we could be able to do it, but we made it. Father, we do thank you for this wonderful detailed prophecy, Lord, of the end times and of the times of Antiochus Epiphanes, and it certainly confirms in our heart that you are able to prophesy the future with such accuracy and such marvelous accuracy. Help us to be encouraged to believe that every jot and tittle of prophecy that has not yet been fulfilled is going to be fulfilled, just like these prophecies, these detailed prophecies of the time of Antiochus were fulfilled. In Jesus' name, amen.